Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the March 2022 edition of Socialism for All. It's an audiobook and discussion of Neither Fascism Nor Liberalism, Sovietism by Gramsci from 1924. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So again, this is a file by Antonio Gramsci, Italian communist from 1924. The source is L'Unità, October 7, 1924. Translated by Mitchell Abador. Copyleft Creative Commons. Attribute and share alike. Marxists.org, 2008. Thanks as usual to Marxists.org, the Marxists Internet Archive. They host thousands of free Marxist texts. Please go check them out, support them, and or volunteer for them if you can. So before we get into the audiobook, a little bit of context here. 1924, what was happening in Italy in terms of socialism, communism, etc. So World War I, in which Italy had been a participant, lasted from 1914 to 1918. Of course, near to the end of that World War, the Russian Revolution happened late in 1917. And there were also sort of near misses as far as revolution in countries like Germany and Italy. Unfortunately, perhaps due in large part to the Socialist Party's leadership in Italy, the revolutionary moment passed without actually successful revolution occurring. This arguably led directly to the rise of fascism, as the bourgeoisie attempted to replace socialism, communism, Marxism, whatever, with some kind of movement that could take that same radical energy that wanted, revolutionary social change and turn it into a form that was safer for the bourgeoisie. Fascism was that movement. It did go after Marxists and did attack Marxists, but that wasn't its primary purpose. It was to divert proletarian energy away from class struggle, to turn class struggle into national struggle, race struggle, anything but moving away from capitalism into socialism. So by 1924 in Italy, fascism had established a strong foothold, and the Communist Party was still in kind of a fledgling stage, having fairly recently split off from the Socialist Party. So enter this document, an appeal from Gramsci that people support neither fascism nor liberalism, but Sovietism, the new emerging form of Soviet democracy, which was being pioneered by the USSR. So let's get into the text. In the political crisis of the liquidation of fascism, the opposition bloc increasingly appears to be a factor of a secondary order. Its heterogeneous social composition, its hesitations, and its aversion for a struggle of the popular masses against the fascist regime reduce its actions to a journalistic campaign and parliamentary intrigues, which impotently run up against the armed militia of the fascist party. In the opposition movement to fascism, the most important part has passed to the Liberal Party, because the bloc has no other program to oppose to fascism than the old liberal program of parliamentary bourgeois democracy, the return to the Constitution, to legality, to democracy. In the discussion concerning the succession to fascism, according to the Congress of the Liberal Party, the Italian people is placed by the opposition before a choice, either fascism or liberalism, either a Mussolini government of bloody dictatorship or a Slandri, Gioliodi, Amendola, Turati, Don Sturzo, or Vela government tending towards the re-establishment of the good old liberal Italian democracy, under whose mask the bourgeoisie will continue to exercise its exploitative rule. The worker, the peasant, who for years has hated the fascism that oppresses him, believes it necessary, in order to bring it down, to ally himself with the liberal bourgeoisie, to support those who, in the past, when they were in power, supported and armed fascism against the workers and peasants, and who just a few months ago formed a sole bloc with fascism and shared in the responsibility for its crimes. And this is how the question of the liquidation of fascism is posed? No, the liquidation of fascism must be the liquidation of the bourgeoisie which created it. When the Communist Party, in the days after the assassination of Matteotti, issued the slogan, "Down with the government of assassins, dissolution of the fascist militia," it didn't think that the government of assassins should be replaced by a government of those who, in all their policies, had opened the way to and armed the assassins. It never thought that Giolitti, Nitti, and Amendola, who were in power when the fascist militia was formed, would be capable of disarming this militia, which they had favored and armed against the working class. In putting forth its slogan, our party didn't intend to replace failing fascism with the old liberalism, whose opprobrious failure and definitive liquidation the March on Rome had signaled. The Communist Party, from the beginning of the crisis of fascism, affirmed that the working class and the peasants must be the gravediggers and the successors of those in power. The action of the mass of industrial proletarians and peasants is necessary for the defeat of fascism, for the class struggle with all of its consequences. Without a doubt, the proletariat should and must use, in its struggle against fascism, the contradictions and the struggles that have developed within the bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie. But without direct action, fascism can never be brought down. Posing the problem in this way would mean, at the same time, clearly posing the question of the succession to fascism. With the defeat of fascism by the action of the worker and peasant masses, liberalism will have no part in the succession. This right belongs to the government of the workers and peasants, which alone will be capable of, and will have the sincere determination to, disarm the fascist militia, arming the working class and the peasants. At the current time, it is a question of something other than the return of the Constitution, the return to democracy and liberalism. These latter are mellifluous words that the bourgeoisie uses to mislead the workers of the city and the countryside in order to prevent the crisis from taking on its true character, that is, the vengeance of the workers and peasants against the fascism that has suppressed them and against the liberalism that has misled them, and which just a few months ago collaborated or sought to collaborate with Mussolini, citing examples of D'Aragona, Baldessi, etc. The Italian crisis can only be resolved through the action of the laboring masses. There is no possibility for the liquidation of fascism on the plane of parliamentary intrigues, only a compromise that leaves the bourgeoisie at the lead, along with armed fascism at its service. Liberalism, even if inoculated with the glands of the reformist monkey, is powerless. It belongs to the past, and all the Don Struzzos of Italy, united with the Turratis and the Vellas, will not succeed in returning to it the youth necessary for the liquidation of fascism. A government of the classes of workers and peasants, which will not preoccupy itself either with the Constitution or the sacred principles of liberalism, but which is determined to definitively defeat fascism, to disarm it, and to defend the interests of the workers of the cities and the fields against all exploiters. This alone is the sole youthful force capable of liquidating a past of oppression, of exploitation and crime, and of giving a future of true liberty to all who labor. Today, the Communist Party is the only one that repeats this truth to the proletariat. Its influence increases, its organization is developing, but the majority of the workers and peasants, dragged along by the Confederation of Labor and the Maximalist Party, in their turn advancing in the wake of the constitutional opposition, has not yet reacquired its class consciousness, hasn't understood that the working and peasant class is the principal factor in the crisis because it has the irresistible numbers and the great force of youth. If it doesn't want to delude itself, it must act on the plane of the class struggle as an independent force, which will soon be determinate, and not on the plane of class collaboration, in order to do nothing but change the mask of the Italian bourgeoisie. The essential task of our party consists in having penetrate among the workers and peasants this fundamental idea. Only the class struggle of the mass of workers and peasants will defeat fascism. Only a government of workers and peasants can disarm the fascist militia. When these essential truths will have penetrated the spirit of the working and peasant masses by means of our tireless propaganda, the workers of the factories and the fields of whatever party will understand the need to construct worker and peasant committees for the defense of their class interests and for the struggle against fascism. They will understand that these are the necessary instruments of the revolutionary struggle and of their will to replace the government of assassins with a government of workers and peasants. At the moment of the closing of the Liberal Congress, which seeks yet again to win over the working people, from one end to the other of Italy, the workers and peasants answer their sonorous and empty chatter with neither fascism nor liberalism, Sovietism. That's the end of the audiobook. So this is a pretty clear appeal from Gramsci for the type of worker-peasant alliance resulting in the creation of Soviets that was pursued successfully in Russia for the overthrow of the bourgeoisie. So basically, you have the question, okay, fascists have taken control of the capitalist state. Basically, the bourgeoisie have gone with the terroristic rule of a fascist capitalist government over more of a liberal democratic capitalist government. This is not, as the fascists would like you to believe, some kind of independent alternative. Actions in class society come from one class or another, sometimes more than one class, acting in unison. Fascism was not a working class movement. Although, like any reactionary movement, it may have picked up some support from members of the working class or peasantry. That is not primarily whose interests it serves and not who the driving force behind its policies were. Fascism, in general, tends to be a movement of the reactionary petty bourgeoisie who align with the big bourgeoisie. In capitalism, there are two great classes. The big bourgeoisie, they are great because they control lots of wealth, most of the wealth, and the proletariat, because we are great in numbers. The petty bourgeoisie is caught between these classes. It is not great either in numbers, it's pretty small, maybe 10%, 20% of the population, depending on the society, and it's not great in wealth either. Therefore, to get anything done, the petty bourgeoisie has to align itself either with the big bourgeoisie, that would be the reactionary petty bourgeoisie, or with the proletariat. This would be the more progressive section of the petty bourgeoisie. So the question comes up, okay, you've come down with a case of fascism. What's the remedy? Is it liberalism? Well, as Gramsci points out, this is just another mask of bourgeois rule. It's not really an alternative to fascism because it's not really opposed to fascism. Fascism is, you could say, a tactic, part of the strategy that the bourgeoisie use to maintain their class rule. They use liberal democracy when that suits them, and then in times where there's heightened danger of proletarian revolution or similar crisis, they may resort to the more terroristic form of capitalist rule, fascism. But make no mistake, these liberals collaborate with fascists, although some of the bourgeoisie may feel uncomfortable embracing fascism. They recognize it's a necessary evil for them at times to maintain capitalism. But Gramsci points out here that some of these, opponents of fascism, as they would like us to believe in the proletariat, are not really. They collaborate with them. So let's say in the United States today, which is not the same as Italy a century ago exactly. However, there are certain things about capitalism which remain remarkably consistent over time. You have a very far-right party that is more and more openly embracing naked fascism, the Republican Party, and then the also right-wing, quote, liberal Democrats, less and less liberal by the year, but, it is what it is. I mean, they basically stamped out any trace of liberalism progressively since, the late 70s or so. Until now, you just have a party basically of austerity ghouls with a few sort of hood ornaments like Bernie Sanders or AOC in there to liven up the mix. Anyway, they will rightly point out that the Republican Party is becoming nakedly fascist. However, do they really oppose them? No, not really. On most significant measures, they collaborate directly with them. Therefore, when proletarians are looking for some kind of an alliance against fascism, people suggesting that the Democrats should be part of this are just fucking lying. They are totally incapable of being anti-fascist. They're controlled by the same finance capitalists that control the Republican Party. In many cases, it's just literally the exact same donors and controllers, and then otherwise it's the same basic class elements, even if, you know, a particular finance capital firm tends to favor one party over the other. Basically, you've got the same types of backing of each group. There's no real possibility there of some kind of anti-fascist force coming out of the more, quote, liberal, although, like I said, even that is rapidly evaporating and just becoming an illusion, Democratic Party. So what's the solution? Well, do we have to wait around for some kind of alliance between petty bourgeois and working class elements? I would say no, because just in terms of class composition, the USA, I mean, we don't really have a peasantry so much. There's a gigantic proletariat, which is like 90% of society. Wage workers are like 90% of US society. So when your class is 90% of society, you don't really need so much to make alliances with other classes to enforce your will. You just have to get organized and actually fucking do the thing. That's where I would say we're at today. You know, I've discussed this at length elsewhere. But anyway, this is a question that comes up in the face of fascism. You know, in the past, in societies at different stages of capitalist development, like, for example, Spain, there was more of a need for a popular front in Spain because the proletariat wasn't as large. There was a large peasantry and a petty bourgeoisie. Just the proletariat had not been developed because capitalism hadn't been running in an advanced stage for as long. But, you know, that's Spain over 100 years ago. You know, this is, in this case, Italy 100 years ago. Different class compositions of those societies. However, when we're talking about 2022, you have a gigantic proletariat, which has zero interest in fascism. Now, in the United States, it gets a little bit more complicated because there are hierarchies within the working class. The United States has several layers of racial oppression. There are the Native Americans, indigenous nations, which are not really part of the U.S. in the same way, that were pushed off of the land and pushed onto reservations. Then on top of that, you have people from all over Africa who were forcibly imported, brought over into the U.S. territory, specifically to be slave labor and then later cheap lower class labor. You also have undocumented laborers, especially from Central and South America, but not exclusively. And then you have more of the, you know, quote, mainstream working class, white passing, you know, accepted within white society, who, while definitely oppressed by capitalists and have surplus value stolen as part of the process of production under capitalism, objectively have it better off than others within the racialized labor hierarchy. This is a problem that people in the US have not been able to overcome. Okay, if workers had been able to come together, particularly white workers had been able to step outside the bubble of white privilege, we wouldn't be having this conversation today, because probably there would have been a much stronger movement that probably would have been a lot more successful. So we'd be in a different situation today. However, the ruling class has consistently used that racialized hierarchy within the working class to its advantage to keep workers divided, and that's an essential part of US fascism. So although overall people who qualify as the proletariat, who don't really own capital, is the overwhelming vast majority of the US population, bringing everyone together and not falling for fascist ploys and points of division has been the missing factor. And by the way, by this I do not mean when specially oppressed groups get together according to their membership in a specially oppressed group to do organizing along the lines of that special oppression. Yes, from a Marxist perspective, we don't want to see people completely eschewing class analysis in order to do class collaboration along racial lines or something like that. We don't want to see that, at least as the end product of such organizing. That's not divisive. it's not divisive for people who experience special oppression to organize along those lines. A lot of times that is a direct result of not being able to organize within white-led working class coalitions. So this is the kind of the variable here is the white working class would-be leadership getting out of the way and not continually exercising white privilege in a way that crowds out other oppressed people, other proletarians who experience special oppression, from being able to actually bring their full set of grievances to the table. And if that was not the case, probably we wouldn't have this kind of split. Anyway, hopefully that's clear. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion there. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more, whatever you see fit. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, so thank you very much for that. I've been able to produce a lot more content than I would have been able to do otherwise without patron help. So if you like this channel, thank me, but also thank a patron. Otherwise, liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting on the channel all help to boost the channel in the YouTube algorithm, help more people to see the content. The channel has been growing, so thanks to all the people who have been helping out with their engagement. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.